Hi, welcome to Bot Brack. I'm over Box, and today I'm going to be talking about one of my favourite genres in the 80s and 90s and into the noughties, which is the action film. So, always been a big fan of action films, going back to war films like Where Eagles Dare, Bullet. Obviously, the James Bond fans, as people will know, a big thing with me. But obviously, in the 80s, the action film really came of age because you had specific stars who were known for that genre, and these were a big thing at the video shop to rent. Going into the 90s, it evolved even more, and then you start to get better actors appearing in action films like John Travolta, and of course Nicolas Cage, more of him later, and latterly an actor like Matt Damon with the Bourne films. But I think what's important about this is I want to look at kind of pure action films. So, for instance, on any normal day, Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior and Fury Road, Predator and Terminator 2 would certainly make my greatest action films ever made, but they're sci-fi as well. So I just want to deal with pure action films where a specific male stars kind of cast for their action credentials and so on. And that means I won't be talking about James Bond either. That's a kind of separate thing, even though it has big scale action sequences. And the Indiana Jones films, I feel they're kind of a separate thing, although Raiders of the Lost Ark is undoubtedly one of the greatest action adventure films ever made. And then you get something like Enter the Dragon, which any day of the week is one of my favourite films. Great film, but it's martial arts as well. So I guess I'm really looking at action films that don't have those elements. I mean, we could look at, Van Damme films. I will mention Steven Seagal. So, in actual fact, going on Steven Seagal, I'm not a massive fan, but one of the common things of the action genre is the Die Hard plot. And this has proved to be the most popular plot, I think, in 80s, 90s action. Once Bruce Willis started Die Hard, you had a whole load of knockoffs. Typically, the plot is terrorists take over something, and then the action occurs in that kind of space. That could be a very contained space, like a plane, or a wider space, like an airport. So, for instance, Die Hard 2 is an airport. It's Passenger 57 with Wesley Snipes takes place in a plane in the airport. One I really like and nearly made my cut. I just knocked it off there. But his Executive Decision, I think this is a really strong, coming late in the day, 1996, same year as Eraser, which I'll talk about in a sec. But Kurt Russell on top form, really good plot that actually, they've got chemical weapons on the plane and want to fly into something. Obviously, we know what happened there. David Suchet, really good villain. I mean, this film was criticised at the time for its depiction of the villain, but, with what happened, it kind of seems more prescient. You got a good cast, John Leguizamo. Sorry, you mispronounced that. Oliver Platt plays the geek. This was really tight. I think what lets it down, just edges it off. It's got a great Goldsmith score as well. Steven Seagal's in it and he gets killed off as well, sorry, spoiler alert. All good. Some slightly weak effect shots, but they're pretty good. But I think the thing that lets down is Stuart Bayard, the director, is a film editor. He does a good job. It has the good pacing, good cutting, but he doesn't have the camera movement. He doesn't have the sort of individual vision of a John McTiernan, John Woo, Rennie Harlin, Michael Bay, those 90s action directors who were well renowned. But that's one that hasn't made the cut. I really like a really naff film that copies the Die Hard plot. It's a film called Crackerjack, which is well worth checking out because it's really stupid. It's Thomas Ian Griffith, who we'll know from the Karate Kid 3, and he's come back in Cobra Kai. He plays like a cop, Jack something or other, and his nickname's Crackerjack because he's mad. But it's Die Hard in a alpine hotel, so it's in some ski resort in Colorado, and Christopher Plummer, the Oscar-winning late Christopher Plummer is the villain. He's actually really good, Christopher Plummer. He does the Hans Gruber, but he has these top tinted John Lennon glasses and does a European accent. And it's actually a cut above the usual crap like this. So check that out. Obviously, you get your Lethal Weapons as well. Now, I like Lethal Weapon 1 and Lethal Weapon 2. But I've always felt those, I didn't like the music, and I always felt like Richard Donner, as good as a director he is, and I think he's a director worth taking seriously because he did a lot of genres, he didn't quite have the action chops for me. I think a better example of that is Last Boy Scout, which is owes a lot to Lethal Weapon in that, yeah, it's a white guy and a black guy. Double act, it's Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans. But it's also written by Shane Black. But The Last Boy Scouts, one which nearly made the cut, it's really good. Willis is great. It's really violent. Tony Scott does good direction. I think the fact it was set in the world of American football and it had come after a spate of action films, I don't think it did as well internationally. But its US gross was just under $60 million. So if you released it now, it would be a pretty sizable hit. And that was paid a lot of money for the screenplay. I think it was $4 million. That was a record back then. Might not be actually. It was beaten by Basic Instinct. Can't quite remember. It was a very high price play for the screenplay. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, that one. And well worth checking them out. There's a great bit where Bruce punches a guy's nose bones into his brain. He goes, "Touch me again, I'll kill you." He's like, fucking awesome. Bruce at his best. Then you've got, I mentioned before, Died subplot, Under Siege, Steven Seagal, obviously he's in Executive Decision. Under Siege is Die Hard on a warship. Under Siege quite good. Andrew Davis, a good thicker action director, but again for me just lacking, much better dramatically, lacking the sort of camera movements, the whip pans and the tracking shots and the steady cam shots that we know from the more fluid action directors. Under Siege 2 is one of the most hilarious films ever. Steven Seagal takes on the bad guys in a pair of really nice bespoke cowboy boots and he hangs off a cliff in them in a suit. Obviously sensible gear for an action film. It's got one of the best lines at the end. He plays a cook, of course. He has a fight with the guy, I think it's Ed O'Neill, who's in... No, not Ed O'Neill. I've forgotten his name, but he was in Twin Peaks. Your top actor, I think he played a character called Ed, and basically, I think Seagal's character, Casey Ryback, kicks a knife in his head and says, "No one beats me in the kitchen." Terrible film, but sometimes these films are so bad they're enjoyable. Obviously you got Stallone and Arnie with the preeminent action stars. You got Rambo 3. Actually, Rambo 3 is pretty big scale action in that. You've got Arnie in films like The Running Man, Raw Deal. These were all lesser Arnies, but very entertaining. But I think an interesting Arnie is Eraser, which I mentioned before. This is coming at the tail end of the action cycle, and it was an attempt at a franchise launch. It grossed about $240 million, but it was a $100 million budget, and it didn't quite get there. It is a lot of fun, but the problem is it suffers from being like what I call a CGI action film. So it's where CGI started to take over, and sometimes the CGI sequences aren't that convincing due to the level of effects back then. Typically action films, what they prided themselves on was physical stunts, proper action, which, were born out of the James Bond films and Indiana Jones, where, they're doing it for real. But I do like Eraser. Arnie's good in it. It's got a good ensemble cast. Vanessa Williams, James Caan, guy who played the American Cracker. Forgotten the name of the actor, apologies, he passed away sadly a while ago. But if you go on Joe Blow videos, actually, they do a really good article on Eraser. And if you Digital Spy, I think's done a good one. And just talking about Eraser, kind of end of a cycle, really. Stallone did The Specialist, sci-fi action in Demolition Man, and so on. But yeah, I think I've covered that. Obviously I mentioned Enter the Dragon before being martial arts, and obviously martial arts is a big staple of the action genre, and having the sci-fi action as well. So let's get on to my top 10. What I'm going to start off with, I'm going to put this in at 10, and it's cheating a bit because really these films should be from the 80s and 90s, but I think the one action franchise that stood alone with a male actor in the 90s was, of course, the Bourne films, the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, the Bourne Ultimatum, the Jeremy Renner one, and then obviously Jason Bourne. I actually think they dropped the ball with Jason Bourne. They should have waited, had Matt Damon living happily in retirement, and then he gets brought out of service. They brought back Jason Bourne too quickly. I think they were greedy there. But the three original Bourne trilogy is obviously really good. My pick is the Bourne Supremacy. This is probably the most action-driven and the least plot-driven, and that's maybe why I like it, but it's got kineticism about it. It's short. I think it's under 2 hours. It's got a great opening sequence, which is really sad, tragic, well done. And there's a great car chase in it. All the Bourne films have car chases in, but I think this is the best. And what I like about this is pure visceral filmmaking, it's pure forward motion. I think the difference is you've got a serious director like Paul Greengrass coming into the action genre with his documentary style, and this proved very influential in a bad way. Really, editing started getting really choppy. The Second Taken film's an example of that, and the Bond film Quantum of Solace. But I feel for the Bourne films, for the realism that Greengrass wanted to bring to it, and the kind of more serious tone, I think it worked. I mean, in the Bourne films, there's no piffy one-liners. People die, they die horribly. Matt Damon's character's being used by the state. It's looking at corruption. His girlfriend dies. All sorts of serious things occur in the Bourne film. So I like that tone. I like the down the line tone. They always have good music. Damon's excellent. And of course, the thing which makes him stand out is the fight scenes using unusual objects. I have a feeling this is the one where he uses a wrapped up magazine, but I could be wrong with that, so I'm getting muddled up. But do like the Bourne films. Bourne Legacy, that was the Jeremy Renner one. They didn't need to do that either. But anyway, that's my number 10 choice. It maybe be higher up, but I kind of wanted to focus more on 90s. So my number 9 choice is, I don't like this film as much as I used to, but I think this guy's got to be in it. Now, I could have and should have put, sorry, I'm getting a call here. I'm just going to press that, sorry. Apologies. I could have and should have used one of his Hong Kong films, but I just wanted to focus on the American aspect of things. So I'm choosing Face Off, John Woo's one Hollywood film where he kind of got his John Woo-ness in properly. So John Woo first went to Hollywood with the Van Damme film Hard Target that I actually quite like. I think it's got some great action sequences and a great villain. It's just the slow-mo and the doves doesn't really work with Van Damme and his mullet. Then he did Broken Arrow, which was very disappointing. Didn't have the classic John Woo bits. But it's worth checking out as an example of 90s action and using more serious actors, John Travolta and Christian Bale. Obviously this film brought him to John Travolta. Then he got this. Now at this point he gets John Travolta, who has had a massive resurgence, but he also gets Nicolas Cage, who's been in the previous year's The Rock and will be in Con Air as well. That establishes an action star, and what's great is they get to switch roles. Nicolas Cage starts off with the villain, John Travolta's the good guy, they swap faces. I think with this, Woo manages to get his stuff in, he gets his sort of bromance stuff in, he gets his wild emotions, he gets his doves. There's the brilliant shootout in slow-mo with Somewhere Over the Rainbow playing. It's violent. I think there's a real stunt at the end with the guys flying through the air on the speedboat. I think the speedboat sequence is really well done, but what lets it down, you can spot that it's stunt doubles and not Travolta or Cage. They don't disguise it very well. At the time, this was like a pretty mind-blowing film. It was like crazy. It was like, oh, that was awesome. Looking at it now, it's pretty daft, but I think you've got to have it in there because it shows the evolution of the action film by the late 90s, where you're bringing in Oscar-nominated, Oscar-winning actors into the role of the action star and a bona fide action auteur from abroad. Number 8, I'm going to go for True Lies. Again, this is a film where it's a changeover, where it's moving from physical action to CGI action at times. The CGI is really good in this. When Arnie pulls up in the plane and the tower block and shoots, absolutely brilliant. I never liked the way the Jamie Lee Curtis character was treated. I felt that was pretty too on the edge and dodgy at the time. Now it looks even worse with the culture we're in. And there's that lag in the middle of the film where it kind of goes into comedy. Oh, I'll turn my wife into a secret agent. I don't like those bits, but the action other than that and the James Bond pastiche is really good. Obviously, Arnie tried an action parody the year before, The Last Action Hero, meta action film, I guess. It didn't work, but you can see how by this point they're starting to kind of send things up more with Arnie, Stallone and so on, because it's getting ridiculous. By this point we've had a lot of action films. Really really top film, amazing direction by James Cameron. That brilliant bit where the machine guns rolls down the stairs in slow motion. He cuts in slow mo to people being shot. It's just classic kind of filmmaking, using different camera speeds and using the editing. So great. Next one we go for, number 7, and this is another kind of crossover film. Still mostly physical action, but it attracts a younger star into the action genre, and that's Keanu Reeves, and of course I'm talking about Speed. So this uses the Die Hard plot. Terrorists don't take over the bus, but there's a bomb on the bus and you've got a terrorist by remote, which is Dennis Hopper. The bits at the start is pretty good. It's basically 3 action films in one. You've got the lift action bit, you've got the bus action bit and the train action bit. I think the train action bit's a mistake. I think he should have finished with the bus action and then have him tracking down Hopper or something. But the bus sequences are really good. The tension, the idea of this, that they can't go below 50 miles an hour. This was one of those films where it sold itself even before you saw a frame. But I remember at the time, they said, we're doing a film called Speed with Keanu Reeves. I'm like, oh, Keanu Reeves. And then it was like, there's a bomb on the bus, and if it goes below 50 miles an hour, the bus will blow up. I just thought that is genius. And no wonder it was a big hit. And it's introduced briefly Jan de Bont into the action genre. He'd been a top cinematographer for Verhoeven, and so on. Actually, mentioning Verhoeven, of course, Total Recall is a superb action film, but it's sci-fi. So again, it goes in like the Terminator 2 Aliens camp. Whereas brilliant as his action, I wanted to focus just purely on the action. So I really like Speed, massive hit, and obviously Keanu had a bit of a rough patch after it, and then he did The Matrix and became a 90s, noughties kind of icon of cinema of that time. My number 6 choice brings in Nicolas Cage for the first time. So my choice for this is Con Air. I think if someone lets these films down, it's directed by a hack, Simon, what's his second name? I've forgotten. He's done a few action films. He's decent. But it's more Simpson Bruckheimer. Well, Jerry Bruckheimer. But this film's great. It's got great action, hilarious characters. I think this is where the action film, they start to bring in a more serious actor than Nicolas Cage. Obviously did The Rock the year before. You've got John Malkovich doing a brilliant villain. Really Steve Buscemi, Rachel DeConn, really good supporting cast. John Cusack. Works really well. It's a very funny film. It's got great action sequences. The bit where they crash in Vegas is hilarious, and the bit with the fire truck, it does the speed problem. It tries to triple climax. It doesn't quite work, but it is hilarious. This is a film where it just doesn't take itself seriously. It kind of knows it's ludicrous, and it's kind of got the Dirty Dozen on the plane. I really like it. It's got some of the best lines in action films, particularly from John Malkovich. The last thing little Casey Poe will smell is my stinking breath. I think it's something like that. Absolutely brilliant. So, yeah, this reaffirmed Nicolas Cage's star status as an action hero. Number 5, I'm going for another Die Hard rip-off. It's 1993's Die Hard on the Mountain, it's Cliffhanger. So this film had the best trailer, one of the best trailers ever conceived. It's basically loads of brilliant action images cut to opera. With the tagline, hang on. When you saw us at the pictures at the time, you were like, Jesus Christ. Brilliant opening sequence with good map process work where the girl falls. But that plane-to-plane transfer is like a real fucking Bond-style stunt. It's excellent. Then you've got really cool climbing sequences. It's very violent. John Lithgow makes a great villain. Do you expect me to die? Brilliant. I think Stallone's good. He brings a bit more depth to it. Looks in shape. Yeah, there's ridiculous bits, obviously. But I think this is well paced. I think Rennie Harlan briefly was right up there. He did this and he did The Long Kiss Goodnight, which didn't do that well, but, brought in female action with Gina Davis. Cool Shane Black script, I think. Really good action sequences. The touches he shows with this, he didn't really show in Die Hard 2. There's kind of more slow-mo, more Cameron-esque. And this film was a big hit. Grossed 80 million at the US box office, about 260 million worldwide. And this was a Carlico production. So Carlico, when you saw the Carlico sign, you had Total Recall this. You just knew you were going to get action. Big stars and shitloads of money spent. Good score by Trevor Jones, who did Last of the Mohicans. So my number 4 choice is Nicolas Cage. Now most people would pick Face Off or Con Air. But I'm going to go with The Rock. I think The Rock's fantastic. I'm not a big Michael Bay fan whatsoever. And I think his direction always lets things down, but he stays the right side on this. I think what's fantastic about this is effectively cast Sean Connery as Bond, as if he's been locked up. Connery's brilliant. Cage is brilliant. Ed Harris brings real like intensity to it. The chemical weapons plot's good. That's really nasty when you see the guy get killed. This had a great trailer for it at the time, Get Ready to Rock. Really tense. There's quite a lot of tension at the end, especially if those rockets hit San Fran. Some good deaths. Musical scores pounding. Very funny. You know, Connery's in his element here. And this was a big hit. I mean, this grossed $340 million. And really established Connery, you know, since he'd come back with Indiana Jones, you know, that this guy was one of the all-time great movie stars and all-time great action stars from James Bond. And then it introduced Cage as an action star. Obviously, Cage would do Con Air, he'd do Face Off. Then there would be a gap, and then he'd do Gone in 60 Seconds. And that's a kind of end of a cycle thing now. That's another Simpson Bruckheimer, directed by Dominic Sena. Also did Swordfish with John Travolta. And those films came at the tail end, and they did quite well, but they didn't have the grosses of the previous decade. And then the Bourne films did well. James Bond was re-established by this point, and so on. So things changed. Another film we should remember from the Die Hard plot as well, casting more serious actors, Air Force One, of course, with Harrison Ford, Gary Oldman, Glenn Close, you know, serious actors coming in. Okay, that's my number 4. Number 3, I think this film is really important. I think it's an excellent film, but what it does is it casts a pure action star in a purely action-driven narrative. And although people probably didn't realise it at the time, it kind of does start to set the staple out, is I can cast this kind of male star in this kind of role. It will be action-packed, and that's what's going to sell it in its first blood, Stallone. So this directed by Ted Kotcheff, not an action director per se, auteur, but he does a really great job of staging action sequences. Stallone's fantastic in this, I believe. I think he brings genuine pathos to his character. Brian Denny, he's superb. And of course, Richard Crenna, he's made things that made a Billy Goat puke. Great Jerry Goldsmith score. It's a shame what happened to the Rambo character when his body became over-muscled. I love the opening scenes where he's just walking along. He's in his, his army coat, drifting, and he's treated really badly, and you really feel, you know, he's served his country, however naively. He's gone to see a friend who's Agent Orange, has called cancer, and he's died. And the sheriff, they just, you know, get out, you know, we don't want you here. And naturally he, you know, fights back against that, and he has the flashback from his torture. Really good. And Stallone's great in those scenes, you know, even though he's a little inarticulate. I think it's really good. And I think this film grossed about nearly $60 million back in 1982, so if you released it now, you'd be looking at nearly $200 million gross. So it showed the kind of numbers that these kind of films could do, but it's a bit more serious First Blood. It has none of the jokey humour or anything like that. A lot of the previous, I think really the previous films I've gone through, Born aside, and yeah, most of them have goofy humour, you know, they don't take themselves too seriously. Number 2, I'm going for a film that's actually really pretty poorly made by a hack director, but I just think it's just brilliant fun, and it's the star. Although he made better films, if you had to pick a film of the time, it was great just to get a video shop. It is Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is great fun. It's got endless brilliant one-liners from Arnie. There's the funny continuity error with the Porsche, where the wrong side of the Porsche is bashed up. I love that, but I think what this just totally is driven on Arnie's star power. He looks amazing in his physical peak. The bit where he tools up and puts the makeup on, and he has the kind of homoeroticization, I suppose, of his body image, which is very common in action films. You know, very muscular, shirt off and stuff like that. It's got funny characters, you know, Sully and Bennett, letting off a little steam, Bennett. Great. It's, if you looked at it objectively as a film, it's not particularly well made, and it's kind of crap, but it's just brilliant. And I like the, when she says about the macho bullshit, and this Green Beret's going to eat you for breakfast. Bill Duke says that it's already starting realising that these are right for satire. And whenever it comes on, I just have to watch it, or some of it. The opening's hilarious with the deer. I mean, it's brilliant. Okay, so I think hopefully I've been for everything that I wanted to talk about there. Hopefully I haven't missed anything, but obviously number one, it can only be one film, can't it? Die Hard. Undoubtedly the best action film of the very late 80s. The one, it was so good that the plot was ripped off. I've been through a lot of the films to do that. With Bruce coming in as an action star, it brought someone with a bit more acting chops, who's more articulate, who could do the humour, very blue collar, and he could do comedy, he could do, Pulp Fiction, 12 Monkeys, stuff like that. A kind of underused actor, really. He could have done better. I think, there was a lot of controversy with this because he was paid, $5 million, but it paid off. Interestingly, Die Hard 2, uses the same device where they're in the airport, not a tower block, but Die With a Vengeance, the other three Die Hards have them in cities, so it kind of goes against the Die Hard plot of being in some kind of set space or landscape. But brilliant. It has the thing where, you cast like a really great actor in a villain role and they scenery chew. Obviously it's Alan Rickman. But the cinematography by Jan de Bont's incredible. And I think John McTiernan, I think his style of direction, particularly on this film, really set the bench high for how the camera should be moved, the type of lighting. He does these great whip pans and tracking shots. Shame what happened to John McTiernan. He just kind of lost his Welsh. He went to jail. But for Predator and Die Hard, the guy was absolutely top-notch filmmaker. So that's my number one choice. So that's my trawl through kind of 80s, 90s action films. I'm sure people have got their favourites and disagree with some things. So, and I've probably forgotten something. There's a lot of them. But I hope you enjoyed that, and see you soon. Thanks.